A murder resembling an execution shocks a quiet Los Angeles suburb. Detectives follow a trail of money and blood stretching from Hollywood to Cancun. But when the prime suspects start dying one by one, even seasoned investigators begin to doubt that the mastermind behind it all will ever face justice. 1980, Los Angeles. Among the many who can't shake their Hollywood dreams, there are a select few for whom these dreams have actually come true. Bob Samuels, a 32-year-old Californian, works in the entertainment industry and has been behind the camera for dozens of Hollywood blockbusters. Passionate about photography since childhood, he now works as an assistant cameraman and has contributed to the filming of movies like Lethal Weapon, The Color Purple, Heaven Can Wait, MASH*, Simon & Simon, and Beverly Hills Cop 2. He was considered a fairly sought-after cameraman, yet despite all his professional success, one dream remained out of reach, a dream named Mary Ellen Gurnick. Bob had liked Mary Ellen since he was 8 years old, back when their families lived next door to each other. The little girl had grown into a very attractive young woman, always surrounded by admirers. Perhaps this was why Bob never quite mustered the courage to ask her out during their teenage years, and after high school, their paths diverged. But 15 years later, they met again in California, and by then, their lives had changed considerably. Bob was seen as a promising prospect, while Mary Ellen was looking to start fresh, a divorced woman raising a young daughter, ready to find new love. When Bob learned she was single, he didn't miss the chance to ask her on a date. In 1980, Bob achieved his own Hollywood happy ending by marrying the girl of his dreams. He adopted her daughter, Nicole, and they all moved together to a suburb of Los Angeles. Bob knew that Mary Ellen loved luxury and comfort, and he did everything he could to satisfy her every whim. Working on blockbuster films, he earned well and spoiled her generously. Perhaps aside from their long-standing connection, Mary Ellen was drawn to the fact that he worked in Hollywood, mingled with movie stars, and could introduce her to a glamorous life filled with celebrity events. However, after a few years of marriage, their feelings began to cool. Bob frequently traveled for work, often gone for weeks at a time, leaving Mary Ellen at home, bored and alone. To keep her occupied during his absences, he bought a small diner and made her the manager. But running a diner wasn't what Mary Ellen had imagined when she married a sought-after Hollywood cameraman. She wanted more, and to get what she desired, she wasn't above bending or even breaking a few rules. Before long, Bob began to suspect that when he was away on shoots, Mary Ellen was taking cash from the register. This really started to worry him. Finally, after 6 years of marriage, Mary Ellen decided that married life with Bob was not what she had expected. She moved to a new home with her daughter, Nicole, leaving Bob a letter explaining how tired she was of their boring marriage. Now that Mary Ellen was free, nothing held her back from the constant partying she had always wanted, not even her underage daughter. On the contrary, she enjoyed being surrounded by Nicole's teenage friends. Nicole's friends were thrilled to be around Mary Ellen, knowing that if she was there, the evening would be unforgettable. Mary Ellen and Nicole quickly became regulars at Los Angeles's most exclusive clubs. And it was there that Mary Ellen met yet another man from the entertainment industry, Dean Groover, a music promoter. For a 40-year-old woman clinging to her youth, Dean represented her last chance to break into the world she had always dreamed of. Mary Ellen was having the time of her life, and after 2 years apart, Bob realized that his wife truly had no intention of coming back to him. He decided to formally end their marriage. It was supposed to be an amicable divorce process, as over those 2 years they remained in regular contact, co-managed the diner, and cared for their beloved dog together. Bob continued to pay for Mary Ellen's housing and Nicole's education. Their relationship remained warm enough that Mary Ellen still had a key to Bob's house. In early December 1988, as usual, Mary Ellen tried to reach Bob. What was unusual was that Bob wasn't answering her calls. She left numerous messages on his answering machine, wondering where he could be. 2 days after the silence, Mary Ellen and Nicole drove to his home to ensure that everything was all right. Their eyes were met with the worst scene they could have imagined. The man lay on the floor in the corridor of his house. There was no clothing on him, except for a towel around his waist, and his head was soaked in blood. There was no doubt that this was not an accident. The man had fallen victim to a brutal crime. Mary Ellen called the emergency services, but it was too late to help Bob. Upon inspecting the crime scene, the officers determined that on the day of the murder, the man had returned home, taken a shower, and while leaving the bathroom, walked down the corridor of his house when he was attacked from behind. He was knocked to the ground with a blow to the head, after which he was shot in the back of the head with a gun, pressing a pillow against his ear to muffle the sound of the gunshot. At first glance, it seemed unbelievable, as if someone wanted to kill Bob Samuels. He was a hardworking father and husband, highly respected in his profession. The detectives wondered whether the murder could have been the result of a robbery gone wrong. Although some items in the house were in disarray, as if someone had been searching for something, the police did not find any signs of forced entry, no broken windows or broken locks. A more chilling explanation began to take shape. The murder of a man, more akin to an execution, indicated that someone really wanted Bob Samuels dead. What in his life could have led to such a brutal outcome? Did he have financial problems, a business partner, or addictions? All of this was still to be determined by the detectives. However, before delving deeper, they wanted to take a closer look at the wife of the murdered, Mary Ellen Samuels. Since romantic relationships can turn into rage, spouses are often the first to be questioned. But Mary Ellen had a very solid alibi. She had spent the entire week with her daughter Nicole and hadn't been anywhere near Bob's house. Messages on the answering machine confirmed that she had been calling her husband over the past few days. Both Mary Ellen and her daughter Nicole were tested for gunpowder residue on their hands. The results came back negative. Mary Ellen was then asked to undergo a polygraph test. She was asked if she had been involved in the shooting of her husband. She answered no. She was also asked if she knew who had killed him, and again, she answered no. The polygraph examiner concluded that Mary Ellen was telling the truth. Although she was ruled out as a suspect, Mary Ellen gave the investigators a useful lead. She thought she knew someone who might have wanted Bob dead. Her husband had been seeing the wife of a former police officer, James Nolan. Although the woman had separated from her husband, they were still legally married, and James was known for his hot temper. A rejected husband with a strong personality, a stash of weapons, and a reputation for extreme jealousy seemed like an ideal suspect in the police's eyes. However, when investigators interviewed James, they found that he could not have been the killer. He was able to prove that he hadn't been near Bob's house, and there was no evidence or fingerprints at the crime scene that could tie him to the murder. Mary Ellen's boyfriend, Dean Groover, developed his own theory about who might have killed Bob. He believed that Bob had been selling film reels to insiders in the film industry. Bob had worked on a number of successful projects and had supposedly saved leftover ends of film reels, which he stored in a hidden spot in his garage. These film ends were essentially unused parts of negatives remaining on a reel. Since film stock was very expensive, these ends could still be used for producing other movies. Dean speculated that Bob had been keeping and selling these reel ends to adult film producers, which could have provided him with a decent extra income. The execution-style nature of the murder hinted that Bob might have gotten involved with the wrong people. However, detectives couldn't find any evidence to support the existence of Bob's alleged side business. At this point, investigators had run into another dead end and were no closer to understanding who had killed Bob. Then, almost half a year after the man's murder, an anonymous call came into the police department, completely unexpectedly. The caller mentioned a name unknown to the police, Mike Silva. He claimed that Mike was a friend of Nicole's boyfriend, who was also allegedly involved in Bob's murder. The police began digging in a completely new direction, and it turned out that, ironically, Bob's death gave Mary Ellen what he couldn't provide her in life, the means to live a glamorous lifestyle. After receiving the insurance payout, selling the diner, and inheriting all of her husband's assets, she came into more than $500,000. But she wasn't the only one enjoying this new lifestyle. Her 16-year-old daughter, Nicole, became engaged to a man named Jim Bernstein. Jim was 27, a New Jersey native who came to Hollywood, constantly bragging about how he'd soon have everything he wanted. For the time being, he worked in an electronics store. He was smitten with Nicole, and Mary Ellen seemed to approve of the relationship. Whether Nicole was truly in love is unclear, but it was evident that, like her mother, she longed for everything money could buy. As a result, Jim spent all he could to keep his girlfriend satisfied. However, selling televisions didn't pay much, so Jim soon found another way to earn money. He became a middleman in the sale of illegal substances. Investigators invited Jim to the station, hoping that the pressure of an interrogation might make him reveal what he knew about Bob's murder. After questioning, detectives were convinced that Jim was holding something back. They obtained a warrant to search his house but found nothing, and they had no grounds to arrest him. Yet being at the center of the investigation rattled Jim more than the detectives expected. He called his former boss, confessing that he had a huge secret and feared the police were closing in on the truth. Jim said he planned to go to the police and confess everything. He didn't tell his boss what he'd done, but admitted he'd committed a terrible crime and that someone had already been paid for it. Jim promised to stay in touch, but after they ended the call, the boss never heard from him again. Meanwhile, Mary Ellen's behavior began to surprise, if not raise suspicion. The woman acted as though the murder of her husband was a closed chapter, something that could be forgotten. She received the money and spent it at a frantic pace. Expensive cars, clothes, travel, all of this became possible after Bob's murder. Together with her boyfriend, she went to Cancun, where he took a photo of Mary Ellen lying naked on a bed, with her most intimate parts covered by $20,000 in cash. Although investigators never found any evidence linking Mary Ellen to the murder, they suspected that the cheerful widow was hiding something. They searched for proof that Jim and Mary Ellen were involved in the crime, but such evidence never surfaced. The investigation stalled once again and remained at a standstill. On June 27, 1989, an event that seemed unrelated to the murder of Bob Samuels dramatically changed the course of the investigation. In the Ventura Mountains, about 70 miles from Los Angeles, tourists stumbled upon a body. It was hidden in a remote ravine, far from the road, and had been there for 3 to 4 weeks, during which time it had decomposed significantly. Despite the state of the body, the Ventura police were able to take fingerprints. It was Jim Bernstein. Interviews with Jim's friends revealed a lot of interesting details. Jim had told almost nothing to his former boss, except that he was involved in a crime and that some woman had already received money as a result. But as it turned out, he wasn't as secretive with his other friends and acquaintances. Almost everyone in his phone book knew his secret. The woman in question was Mary Ellen. She had persuaded him to kill her husband, Bob. However, rumors and the words of someone who could no longer be questioned were not enough to accuse the widow. However, all of Jim's friends mentioned that in the weeks leading up to his disappearance, he had been living with a woman named Ann Hambley. And she not only knew Jim, but was also a close friend of Mary Ellen. The woman explained that Jim had stayed with her for a while because he was afraid of rival dealers, but he had already moved out. She clarified that one evening they had a fight, and he just walked out of the house and never came back, not even for his belongings. It was hard to believe this story. The investigators informed her that, according to all of Jim's friends, Mary Ellen had hired him to kill her husband. They pressed her, and Ann confessed to everything. The conspiracy began approximately a year before Bob's murder. Mary Ellen wanted to live a luxurious life and was looking for someone to kill her husband, especially since Bob had decided to officially finalize their divorce. He had been out of work for a while and wanted to reduce the amount of money he had been regularly sending to his wife and daughter for the past 2 years. Incredibly, Mary Ellen didn't even try to keep her plan a secret, offering the contract to everyone, including her daughter's friends. When she met Jim Bernstein, she realized she had found the right person. He was easily influenced, lacked self-confidence, wanted to appear tough, and was infatuated with Nicole. She took advantage of this, telling him wild stories about how Bob had abused the girl in childhood. Jim agreed, but probably didn't want to do everything himself, so he turned to Mark Silva for help. Like Mary Ellen, Jim wasn't too secretive and even asked his friend, who owned a gun store, to lend him a pistol. The friend refused, but in the end, the accomplices obtained a weapon and ambushed Bob Samuels at his home when he returned from work. As part of the plan, Mary Ellen left messages on her husband's answering machine. Before finding his body, she waited 2 more days, knowing that he was lying in a pool of his own blood. Since she was never considered a suspect, the woman quickly collected the insurance and inheritance from her husband and sank into a sea of celebration. But not everything went according to plan. Several months passed, Nicole broke off her engagement with Jim, and the young man began to feel used. When the police pressured him, he hinted to his friends that he could reveal what really happened to Bob. But Mary Ellen wasn't about to let that happen, and she was smart enough not to get her hands dirty. She turned to her friend, Ann Hambley, and told her she would forgive the $2,000 debt if she helped her get rid of Jim. Ann quickly came up with a plan, convincing her boyfriend, Paul Gall, and another man, Daryl Ray Edwards, to kill Jim. Paul and Daryl faced charges of first-degree murder, and when they were offered a reduced sentence, the two confessed to how they had carried out the crime. Paul and Daryl convinced Jim to ride with them, supposedly to steal some illegal substances. They used one of Mary Ellen's cars. The killers confessed that the murder didn't go smoothly. They tried to strangle the young man in the car, but when that failed, they had to chase him. They eventually killed him and dumped his body over the edge of a canyon. His body was not found until much later. For their work, Paul and Daryl received $5,000. The last link was still missing. Now investigators wanted to talk to Mike Silva, but they couldn't. Mike Silva had shot his girlfriend and then turned the gun on himself. Finally, the police had enough information to arrest Mary Ellen and charge her with the murder of both her husband and her daughter's boyfriend. The media dubbed her the Green Widow because in the year following her husband's death, she spent more than $500,000. The prosecutor knew the trial would not be easy. She would have to face a woman who had managed to convince several people to kill for her and even get them to kill her husband and boyfriend. A deal was offered to Mary Ellen, but her lawyer immediately rejected the offer. Clearly, Mary Ellen was confident in her ability to convince the jury of her innocence. Therefore, on the first day of the trial, the prosecutor began by showing the jury the very photo of Mary Ellen taken in Cancun. Numerous friends of Mary Ellen and Nicole testified at the trial, claiming they knew about the woman's plan to kill her husband and that Nicole had even asked one of them for a weapon. Surprisingly, none of these people had contacted the police. Psychologists explain this paradox by suggesting that when so many people know a secret, they tend to think that someone else will go to the authorities. These murders could have been prevented. Mary Ellen's defense came from her daughter, Nicole, and herself. They both claimed that Bob was a cruel man who had abused Nicole from a young age and had beaten his wife. Nicole supposedly never confessed anything to her mother until they left Bob's house because she didn't want her parents to divorce. Nicole claimed she had spoken about the abuse to her friends and to the school psychologist, but her friends couldn't confirm this, and she couldn't remember the name of the psychologist. Mary Ellen also claimed that a neighbor had seen a bruise under her eye after Bob had beaten her. However, the prosecutor was able to prove that Mary Ellen had actually had plastic surgery, which was the real cause of the bruise. Overall, it was a strange defense strategy. On one hand, they argued that Bob deserved to die, while on the other, they claimed to have no involvement in his murder. Mary Ellen maintained that she had never planned Bob's murder and never asked anyone for a weapon. Essentially, they were just claiming that everyone around them was lying except for them. The jury deliberated for 18 days and found Mary Ellen guilty of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to death. However, on December 3, 2019, the district court overturned the death sentence because the defense attorney had been ineffective during the trial. He failed to object when the prosecutor accused her of taking illegal substances and presented naked photos of her. While this likely wouldn't have affected the jury's verdict of guilt, it could have influenced the decision regarding the death sentence. Mary Ellen, now 76 years old, is still serving her sentence in prison. Paul Gall and Daryl Edwards have already served their time. Nicole has not been charged.
On a beautiful autumn morning on October 22, 1993, Doug Boggs entered his hardware store in the resort town of Steamboat Springs, Colorado. The store had been in operation for 63 years, a family business that Doug ran with his brother, Gerald or Jerry Boggs. However, that morning, Jerry did not show up for work. This was entirely uncharacteristic of him. Jerry was a creature of habit and adhered to a strict daily routine. Doug became so worried that he went to his brother's home. The front door was locked, so Doug went around to the back door leading into the kitchen. As soon as he opened the door, he saw his brother. Jerry was lying on the floor with blood pooled around his head. It was a horrifying scene that shocked Doug to the core. He immediately called emergency services. The police officers who arrived at the scene based on the man's wounds speculated that he had been beaten with a heavy object and had also sustained 3 gunshot wounds. Now, the investigators had to determine how such a tragedy could happen to one of the most respected and beloved citizens of Steamboat Springs. 52-year-old Jerry Boggs had lived in Steamboat Springs for most of his life. He had only left the town for his studies at the University of Colorado and during his time in the Vietnam War. After returning from Vietnam, he resumed working in the family business, and now he and his brother managed the store together. Jerry handled the paperwork and supply orders while Doug interacted with the customers. Jerry was a fairly strong-willed person, but he was also kind, modest, and a loyal friend. By the age of 52, he had grown accustomed to his established bachelor lifestyle. However, everything changed one fine day when a charming 48-year-old woman walked into his store. She introduced herself as Jill COIT. Jill stood out from the other women in town, even from the tourists. She dressed stylishly and somewhat provocatively, but never vulgarly. She was sociable, cheerful, and spoke with a delightful Southern accent. Jill mentioned that she had moved from Culver, Indiana, having bought a small hotel in Steamboat Springs. Since she was fixing up the hotel with her sons, she often appeared in Jerry's store for supplies. Soon, Jerry gathered the courage to make the first move. He asked her out on a date. From that moment on, their romantic relationship began. Just 7 months after meeting, Jerry and Jill got married. This was an unusually spontaneous decision for Jerry, but he had a reason. His beloved was expecting a baby. Jerry had a successful business, family, friends, money, and now his beloved wife was going to give him a child. Jerry was over the moon with happiness. He took the news with full responsibility. He remodeled the house for the baby, bought children's furniture, and read books on parenting. However, his happiness came to an abrupt end as secrets about his wife began to surface one after another. Months went by, yet there were no physical changes in Jill's appearance. By this time, her pregnancy should have been quite visible. Suddenly, Jill went to Texas, and when she returned, she claimed to have given birth to a baby girl named Laura. By then, Jerry's family and friends were not merely suspicious. They outright declared that it was some kind of scam and that he should stay away from her and get a divorce, especially since she forgot to inform him that she was already married at the time they got married. Jerry was devastated, confused as to why she would do this to him, but he knew for certain that the marriage needed to be annulled, as his nature abhorred living in an illegal union. There was also an intriguing financial situation. Jill had convinced Jerry to sign a document stating that he had supposedly lent her $100,000. In reality, he had not given her the money. She needed it to appear as though she owed him a large sum, so she wouldn't have to repay debts to creditors or share finances with her ex-husband. However, after their marriage was annulled and she moved out of his house, Jill sued him. She wanted to remove his name from the document and sell the hotel, which was worth $600,000. As Doug recounted, his brother was already angry about Jill's lies regarding her previous marriage and the fake pregnancy, and the lawsuit brought his indignation and resentment to a new level. Jerry filed a countersuit. He wanted her to stop tarnishing his name, admit there was no pregnancy, and compensate him for his losses. For 2 years, Jerry awaited the court date while he returned to his usual routine. But 6 days before the scheduled court date, his brother found him dead on the kitchen floor. The police carefully examined the crime scene, only to be met with enormous disappointment. There were no signs of forced entry, nothing had been stolen, and the killer had left no clues behind. The murderer took the firearm with them and left no fingerprints or blood on the shovel used to beat the victim. Whoever committed this heinous crime had covered their tracks exceptionally well. Neighbors did not hear any gunshots. However, one neighbor did recall something suspicious. On the day of the murder, she was outside and saw 2 people walking down the street. They looked suspicious enough that she went back inside. Despite the warm weather, they were dressed very warmly and resembled hunters. One was clearly a man, but she wasn't sure about the second person. There was definitely something off about them. At the same time, the medical examiner conducted an autopsy. He determined that the attack on Jerry Boggs had occurred in the afternoon of October 21st. He confirmed that Jerry had been shot 3 times, beaten, and an attempt had been made to strangle him. However, he was puzzled by marks on the right side of Jerry's neck and cheek. These were not the characteristic muzzle imprints of a point-blank gunshot wound. The medical examiner was unable to determine what had caused these mysterious marks. However, for Jerry's family, his murder was no mystery. Doug Boggs told the police that he knew exactly who was responsible. He pleaded with the police to question Jerry's ex-wife, Jill COIT. Doug's suspicions had been aroused 2 years earlier when Jill claimed she was pregnant. His brother was in love and believed everything Jill said. Concerned, Jerry's relatives contacted a friend who was a private detective and asked her to investigate Jill's background. What the detective uncovered was a completely different Jill than the one Jerry knew. With each new detail, the detective was more and more astounded. She even had difficulty determining Jill's birth year because Jill COIT had 4 birth certificates, 3 social security numbers, and at least 15 different identities she had used over the past 25, 30 years. By the time Jill met Jerry, he was potentially husband number 8. Jill Lanita Billiot was born in Louisiana. She had a tumultuous relationship with her brother, which led her to leave home at 15 and move in with her grandparents in Indiana. Local boys were captivated by her southern accent. One such admirer was 18-year-old Larry Eugene Einen. Evidently, the attraction was mutual because at 17, Jill dropped out of school and married him. The marriage dissolved quickly, within a couple of months. And when Jill left her young husband, she took the only thing he had, $280 earned from his masonry assistant job. Interestingly, divorce at that time required stating a reason. Larry cited cruel and inhumane treatment, while Jill requested a restraining order against him. What exactly transpired between the young couple remains unknown, But Jill was determined not to work a modest factory job. She decided to complete her education and return to Louisiana to attend acting classes at the university. For 3 years, she managed to focus on her studies, at least not marrying anyone. However, she eventually married another student, Stephen Moore. Unfortunately, even the birth of their son, Seth, could not save their marriage. Jill left Stephen and moved to Texas with their son. Despite how her approach to life and marriage would change in the future, she didn't gain much financially from her first 2 marriages. While fully aware of her value and attractiveness, Jill secured a job as a model. A beautiful girl caught the eye of successful engineer William Clark COIT Jr. He was unfazed by her 2 previous marriages and adopted Seth as his own son. Jill claimed that he was the love of her life. Despite her happy marriage to William, Jill didn't divorce her second husband until after the birth of her and William's first child. Their second son was born later. William had more resources than any of her previous husbands, which likely sparked Jill's attraction to substantial wealth, and she eagerly spent it. However, William was often away from home, leading Jill to start having affairs. Upon discovering this, William demanded a divorce. A bitter custody battle ensued. But 3 weeks before the divorce was finalized, tragedy struck. William COIT Jr. was murdered in his own home, shot 3 times in the back with a .22 caliber weapon. Detectives believed he knew his killer since he was shot from behind. Before his death, William had withdrawn a substantial amount of money from his accounts, telling friends he did so to prevent Jill from getting it. Unfortunately, he miscalculated. The money was never found, likely because Jill was the one who discovered William's body when he failed to show up for work. Naturally, the police suspected his 27-year-old widow, Jill. However, she managed to flee to New Orleans and hired a lawyer. On his advice, she admitted herself to a psychiatric hospital. This tactic worked, and the police were unable to question her. Without sufficient evidence to extradite her forcibly, Jill spent a year in the psychiatric facility. After her release, she reclaimed her 3 sons from relatives, secured the money she inherited from William, and moved to California to start anew. In California, Jill tried something new. She met Bruce Johansson, who was over 90 years old. Unable to marry him, she used her charm to persuade him to adopt her. After the man passed away, likely from natural causes, she inherited all his assets, finances, and property. She had no time to mourn because she was preparing for marriage number 4 with Major Donald Brody of the Marine Corps. However, Jill unexpectedly found out that her husband could refuse her access to his funds. Their relationship quickly deteriorated, so she resorted to another way to extract money from him. After a lengthy separation, she delighted him with news of giving birth to a boy named Thaddeus John Brody. The Major didn't believe her. She then showed him a fake birth certificate and asked acquaintances to lend her their child temporarily to show him a son, allegedly theirs. But unable to sustain this, a month later she delivered the Major horrifying news. The child had died and she buried him in the family crypt. Fortunately, it was a lie, and when the crypt was later opened, there was no child inside. Realizing she could no longer gain anything from the Major, Jill divorced him and married a man named Louis A. DeRosa. He was a lawyer she hired after fleeing following the death of her 3rd husband, William. He also assisted her in Bruce Johansson's adoption. Their relationship was tumultuous, with the couple divorcing and reconciling 3 times over many years. During one of their separations, Jill managed to marry husband number 6, Eldon Dwayne Metzger, an auction organizer. This marriage was very short and illegal because she divorced Louis DeRosa in Haiti, a divorce not recognized in the USA. Thus, she was still legally married to Louis when she moved to Indiana and met her 7th husband. 2 of her sons attended school in Indiana, where one of the boys' school director was Carl V. Steele. Jill lived with him for 7 years, which were some of the longest and most normal relationships in her life. Carl treated her and the boys well. He loved skiing and often took the family to Steamboat Springs, Colorado. They enjoyed their time there and dreamed of growing old together in that place. During one of their trips, the couple decided to invest in a business by purchasing a small hotel. Jill convinced Carl that she would handle everything herself because he was a teacher, and she felt more capable of managing finances. The plan was for Jill to move to Steamboat Springs, buy the hotel in both their names, renovate it with their sons, and start managing it. Carl would join her when school holidays began. However, Carl encountered a very unpleasant surprise when he arrived in town. Jill simply ousted him. She persuaded him to say goodbye to his money, convinced him to invest in her business, and he was no longer needed. She registered the hotel under her and her elder son Seth's name only. Carl was left without money and in debt. After less than 10 years together, Jill and Carl parted ways. They didn't finalize their divorce before Jill set her sights on husband number 8, Jerry Boggs, the owner of a store in Steamboat Springs. Investigators found too many coincidences between the two murder cases of Jill's ex-husbands, William and Jerry. Both men were killed with the same caliber weapon, which was never recovered. In both cases, there was no forced entry into the home. Jill knew the layout of the rooms in the house, knew when Jerry would return home from work, and it would not have been difficult for her to catch William at home in the evening while he watched TV. But the similarities didn't end there. Jill had a financial motive in both crimes. However, when investigators talked to Jill, it turned out she had alibis. In the same month she annulled her marriage to Jerry, she finally divorced Carl Steele, so she was not married to anyone at the time, perhaps a new feeling for her. Instead, she was dating a telephone technician named Michael Backus. During her conversation with investigators, Jill stated that she and Michael were camping in Poudre Canyon, 240 kilometers away from the crime scene. To set up a tent in that location, they had to fill out a form and pay a fee. This meant that Jill could prove she was in Poudre Canyon if needed. Therefore, she was too far away by the evening of October 21st to have killed Jerry. Investigators decided they needed to pinpoint the exact time frame when the attack on Jerry occurred. A crucial piece of evidence was studying the contents of his stomach. Jerry Boggs was a creature of habit. He opened his store at the same time every day. Then at 11 a.m., he went to a restaurant for breakfast where he always ate the same meal: hash browns, eggs, and toast. Specialists used plant cells, which, unlike protein-based foods, pass through the digestive system unchanged. They determined that Jerry had consumed onions. However, the restaurant chef did not add onions to the hash browns, eggs, or toast. This indicated that Jerry had indeed eaten his meal, meaning he was killed closer to the evening of October 21st, when Jill had an alibi. Thus, Jill had a motive, but no opportunity to kill him. If Jill didn't kill him, who did? Perhaps the unidentified hunters who had frightened Jerry's neighbor. However, the police had no leads on how to find them. Then, on a hunch, one of the investigators visited the restaurant where Jerry had breakfast and stood in the kitchen, observing the chef at work. He noticed that although the chef didn't add onions to the hash browns, he used the same spatula to mix them as he did with onions. This contamination could explain why onion particles were found in Jerry's system. It indicated that he was killed 3 hours after breakfast, a time frame during which Jill didn't have an alibi. Furthermore, the police couldn't find the form she supposedly filled out for the Poudre Canyon visit. This meant she hadn't been camping with her boyfriend and they had both lied. Interestingly, while the police awaited the results from Jerry's stomach contents, Jill managed to get married again, possibly for the last time. When unpleasant rumors began circulating about her in Steamboat Springs, she left for Las Vegas, where she seduced Roy Carroll, a retired Navy officer. However, before the end of the year, she left him and reunited with Michael Backus. According to some sources, she married him. Although no marriage certificate was found, she used his surname in any case. Meanwhile, gathering only circumstantial evidence, the police managed to obtain a search warrant for the suspect's car. Inside, they found maps of Mexico, a couple of wigs, and a stun gun. The discovery of the stun gun prompted the police to exhume Jerry's body to conduct several tests. It turned out that the marks on the victim's face matched those from this weapon. Additionally, the wigs found in Jill's car matched the description of the appearance of the two hunters observed by Jerry's neighbor on the day of his murder. However, the police were unable to arrest the accomplices because they had disappeared. The case would have stalled if not for unexpected assistance from a surprising source: Jill's eldest son, Seth. He called the police and revealed that his mother had asked him to help cover up Jerry's murder and dispose of the body. However, Seth liked Jerry and refused to assist. He informed the police that when the net started closing in on their associates, Jill and Michael traveled to California, crossed by boat from San Diego to Tijuana, then to Mexico City, and finally to Spain. Without Seth's cooperation, Jill might never have been apprehended. However, just a week later, she decided to return to the United States, where police officers tracked her down. Some speculate that she ran out of money. In any case, returning was an incredible risk, bringing her not only back to the country, but also to Steamboat Springs, where she drove around town in her own car, seemingly unfazed by the danger. On December 23, 1993, Jill and Michael were arrested and charged with first-degree murder. Even during questioning, Jill behaved provocatively, attempting to flirt with detectives and vehemently asserting her innocence. She was nearly 50 years old, but had never faced serious legal consequences despite her numerous marriages without proper divorces, document forgery, identity theft, insurance fraud, and being a potential suspect in her third husband's murder. She firmly believed that money ruled the world and that she was untouchable. The trial began in 1995. One by one, witnesses took the stand, including Michael Backus's colleague, who testified that Jill and Michael had tried to persuade them to kill Jerry Boggs, citing false claims that he had harmed a young girl and deserved to die. However, Jerry was a respected member of society, and these claims did not hold up under scrutiny. Furthermore, after her breakup with Jerry, Jill posed as a psychologist, ostensibly helping flood victims. During one session, she asked a client for a gun and offered $1,000 to kill Jerry Boggs. Naturally, the client declined this shocking proposal, especially given the context of seeking professional help for trauma. This incident underscored Jill's audacious approach to manipulating others for her own ends. When their associates failed to find someone willing to commit the murder, Jill and Michael decided to take matters into their own hands. Michael and Jill fabricated a camping trip in the canyon. However, they used this as an opportunity to practice disguising themselves. On the appointed day, they walked the streets disguised as a pair of hunters. Jill wore a mustache, wig, beard, and men's clothing. Investigators believe their accomplices entered through the back door and waited for the victim, lying in wait. After Jerry finished work early and returned home around noon, the killers immobilized him using an electroshock gun. They then beat him with a shovel and attempted to strangle him. When that failed, according to detectives, Jill shot her ex-husband 3 times. Later, she called her son Seth and said, "It's over. It's very messy." As Seth testified in court, he knew she was referring to Jerry's murder. Indeed, his testimony proved crucial in convincing the jurors of the guilt of the accomplices. It took them 5 hours to convict both of first-degree murder and conspiracy. Each received a life sentence plus an additional 48 years for conspiracy, along with a $1 million fine. Clearly, the fine was intended to prevent them from profiting from any movie or book deals about their story. But even this didn't stop Jill. She advertised herself as a green card for anyone willing to marry her. When this project failed, in 2002 she claimed she was subjected to violence and abuse in prison, and her rights were violated. She alleged that a guard had assaulted her and broken her finger. Additionally, she claimed she was denied special orthopedic devices for arthritis. She attempted similar claims in 2006, but they were not believed. Despite filing appeals, all were rejected. Some might say living in marriage is like being in prison anyway. But for Jill COIT, this prison became a lifelong reality. Jill was furious with Jerry because he dared to stand in her way and thwarted her plans. Not only did he refuse to let her sell the hotel, but a private detective hired by his family had gathered enough evidence to expose her. Jerry intended to bring her to justice in court, revealing who she truly was and what she had done, so she couldn't deceive anyone else. However, like William, Jerry never got the chance to confront Jill face-to-face in court. Both men were killed just days before the trial was set to begin. The murder of Jill's third husband was never solved. Jerry died trying to stop a predator, paying a high price for the truth. While Jill had no trouble cycling through men in her life, she didn't easily let go of their money. For the money she believed rightfully hers, she fought to the death, literally in their deaths.
Larry Riskin joined the Navy after school, and over the years of service, he achieved the rank of commanding officer in the Navy fleet. He participated in the Persian Gulf War and demonstrated courage and bravery multiple times, but unexpectedly discovered that he was taking orders from a fragile woman. Larry met SONYA RIOS at a barbecue. She owned a beauty salon in the city of Lomita, a suburb of Los Angeles. He was immediately attracted to the very beautiful and striking woman, and within a year, SONYA took her husband's family name and became SONYA Riskin. They settled in SONYA's house. Larry was always extremely close to his family, parents, brothers, and especially his younger sister Sherry Jackson. But everything changed with the arrival of Sonya. She did not allow him to see his relatives, inventing various reasons why they couldn't visit them in Washington. The relationship deteriorated to the point that Larry didn't communicate with his sister and brothers for over 10 years. They only heard rumors that he had resigned and found a job as a teacher for children with special needs. His colleagues remember that he loved children and adored his job. However, he confessed that he was unhappy at home. One thing weighed heavily on him. He dreamed of becoming a father. However, Sonya did not want to have children, and being a very beautiful woman, she misled Larry, pretending to be younger than him. In reality, she was 16 years older. Of course, women at that age are still capable of having children. But Larry felt that his chances of fulfilling his dream were diminishing with each passing day. That's why he grasped at the last straw. In Sonya's homeland, the Philippines, he became attached to his wife's brother's grandchildren, Quincy and Jetmark. The parents of the teenagers believed that with Sonya and Larry in the USA, their children would have a better future, so they supported Larry's proposal to adopt them. Sonya did not object, but insisted on taking care of all the legal matters herself. A year passed, 2, 3, but the process of adoption was not progressing. Larry discovered that Sonya was intentionally sabotaging the adoption process. At that moment, it was his last chance to create a complete family, and he was very disappointed. So much so that he demanded a divorce. Sonya agreed, but with one condition. She asked her husband to go to the Philippines and sell her family business, a taxi company, a matter that needed to be resolved immediately. The man agreed, partly because he wanted to see the children, especially since Quincy's 16th birthday was approaching. Surprisingly, Sonya did not go, even though the matter concerned her family and her business. Before his visit to the Philippines, the first in 13 years, Larry visited his relatives in Washington. He was happy to start a new chapter in his life without his wife but with her nephews, whom he still hoped to adopt. Immediately after landing, Larry went to see them. During the birthday party, Larry noticed that the little cousin of the boys had developed an eye infection. He insisted on taking her to the hospital. Someone present made a call to Sonya, and informed her that they would be at the hospital. Larry put the girl in the car and, along with Jetmark and a few other adults, they all went to the hospital. After the visit to the doctor, they got back into the Jeep and were about to return home when a motorcycle approached them. One of the two men on the motorcycle started shooting at Larry's head and abdomen. Then the criminals quickly fled the scene. Jetmark tried to help Larry, and called for help. He was confident that they would save him since the hospital was only a few steps away. But the boy was mistaken. They couldn't save Larry. He was 43 years old. When Sonya was informed of her husband's murder, she completely lost control. She was shaking all over and needed help from neighbors Nicole and Jim Thompson to calm her down. Nicole called Larry's sister, Sherry, to inform her about what had happened, but unexpectedly, Sherry started blaming Sonya for everything. Nicole and Jim didn't take her words seriously. Not then. However, the next morning, Sonya asked Jim again to come and help her search for documents. When Jim learned that Sonya was looking for her husband's insurance policy, he refused to help her. While Larry's family was preparing for his funeral, his wife was only interested in the insurance. Moreover, Sonya had no intention of attending the funeral. She arranged for her husband to be cremated, and the urn with his ashes remained in the Philippines with one of her relatives. Larry's relatives saw this as another blow from Sonya, but they still held the funeral and prepared a niche in the mausoleum, where they hoped to someday place the urn with his ashes. They hoped that the Philippine police would solve this case, confident that Larry's wife was behind it all. But at that time, they still didn't know, nor could they have known, that there was another mystery in this story, another man, and another murder. It was news that had the impact of a bomb exploding. Larry Riskin was not Sonya's first husband. And the reason why they were no longer together with her first husband was that he was killed in the Philippines 19 years ago. The man's name was Earl John Bordeaux. Earl's family lived in Davenport, Iowa, in the same house where he grew up. He was the pride of the family. Earl joined the Navy during the Vietnam War, but his unit was stationed in the Philippines, where he met an attractive local girl named Sonya, who sang at a nightclub near their base. It was obviously love at first sight because the young couple quickly got married, and a few months later, Earl brought his young wife home to meet his family. However, the happy reunion did not go well. The girl did not please Earl's family. Therefore, after his departure from the Navy, they settled in Southern California. Several years later, Sonya opened a beauty salon, and her husband found work in a bakery. Outwardly, it seemed like a family filled with love and harmony, but in reality, Sonya enjoyed giving orders to her military husband and controlled him as she pleased. They lived together for more than 20 years when Earl finally realized that such a family life, and his wife's commands were burdening him. Sonya agreed to divorce. But before that, and here a strange sense of déjà vu arose, the husband needed to go to the Philippines to sell the family taxi motor company. Earl didn't want to go, but his wife was inflexible on this issue, and the man chose not to argue. He pleaded with his younger brother Dennis to go with him, but he couldn't quickly obtain a passport, so Earl went to the Philippines alone. It was a hot August night when Earl's plane landed in Manila. He arrived at the house where his wife's relatives lived around midnight. The man was exhausted from the journey, fell onto the couch, and fell into a deep sleep, until he was truly killed. When the police arrived, they found Earl lying in a pool of his own blood. He had been shot. The officers concluded that a robber had entered the house, and Earl had interfered, but there were no signs of forced entry, nothing was stolen, and the criminal only fired at Earl. 3 men were immediately arrested and charged with the murder. Later, 2 more were detained. They were all members of Sonya's family. Fresh human blood was found on the shirt and pants of one of Sonya's brothers. There was enough evidence to send the culprits to prison for a long time. But then came a surprise. Since Sonya was the closest relative, according to Philippine law, she was supposed to attend a preliminary hearing in court where charges would be brought against her family members. However, since she didn't show up, the charges were dropped, and the case was closed. The local authorities claimed their hands were tied. At least officially. Unofficially, the locals gossip that Sonya paid to make all the problems go away. As they explain it, $1,000, and the witnesses would stay silent, and the evidence would disappear. Earl's brother, Dennis, felt guilty because he let his brother go alone, so he constantly called a lawyer in the Philippines, spending thousands of dollars on his own investigation, hoping to make Sonya worried. But instead, he became the target himself. He received around 200 threats over the phone, but he didn't calm down. He reported Sonya to the police and the FBI. As a result, he became the target of the killer. It happened once while he was fishing. The shooter missed, but it didn't end there. Later, the attack happened right near his garage. Dennis informed the FBI about everything, but nothing happened. The Bordeaux case was forgotten until, after 10 years, Dennis learned that Sonya had a second husband, and he suffered the same fate as his brother. Dennis hoped that the renewed interest in Sonya could also revive interest in his brother's case. Once learning Sonya's plans to obtain not only all the property but also her husband's insurance, things didn't go as planned. The insurance company hired a private investigator who quickly discovered that fraud was nothing new for Sonya. She had burned down her beauty salon for insurance purposes, manipulated taxes and receipts. She had been caught twice before, so her name was known to the police. The investigator provided his report to the employer, and the insurance company refused to pay Sonya the insurance money. However, the investigators' work impressed Sherry and her family so much that they hired him to investigate the murders. He quickly found out that Earl's and Larry's murders were similar in that the Sony brothers were involved in both crimes. They, like other family members, were financially dependent on Sonya and were willing to do anything she demanded. Sherry, just like Dennis, handed everything the private investigator found to the FBI, hoping that an investigation would finally begin. However, weeks and months passed, and nothing changed. Sonya continued working at her salon as usual. But after the new year, Sherry started receiving emails. The author claimed that Sonya was responsible for Larry's murder and offered to return his sister's ashes. The emails were signed by John Bordeaux. How could that be? Bordeaux was the surname of Sonya's first husband, but Earl John Bordeaux had long been dead. It turns out that Sonya had a son whose existence she kept secret. She gave birth to a boy in the Philippines when she was a very young girl, a teenager. Earl adopted the boy after their wedding. Earl's family knew nothing about him, nor did Larry's family, despite Larry's desperate desire to have children. Nevertheless, Sherry decided to respond to the emails, primarily because she wanted to return Larry's ashes. John asked for $35,000 in return. But the more they corresponded, the more Sherry became afraid of what kind of person he might be. What if he was a fraud or something worse? With each new letter, she realized that he was indeed worse. For an additional fee, he offered another service, to kill Sonya, whom Sherry despised. Sherry was frightened, not knowing how to escape this situation and fearing what else might happen. Her fears were not unfounded. On April 27, 2007, in Lomita, the 60-year-old owner of a beauty salon was found murdered. She had been shot, and the killing resembled an execution rather than a random shooting. The victim was Sonya Riskin, known as the Black Widow of Lomita, who was suspected of killing not one, but two husbands. She met the same fate as her victims. The arriving police were struck by the meticulous and well-kept nature of the house. It appeared that the owner rarely received visitors during her lifetime, which perfectly matched her character as a reclusive and suspicious woman. It was also interesting to note that there were no signs of forced entry. It seemed that the killer simply entered the house and shot his victim. Her purse remained untouched, along with the cash inside. The neighbors saw nothing. The victim's relatives immediately rushed to the scene, among them her beloved nephew, Eric de la Cruz. Sonya regarded him as her favorite grandson and was proud of him. The young man served on the USS Ronald Reagan aircraft carrier and had just returned home after a tour of Asia. Upon hearing that his beloved aunt had been killed, he immediately informed the police that if something happened to Sonya, John Bordeaux was responsible for it all. John Bordeaux didn't have to be searched for, as he was the one who found Sonya's body and contacted the rescue service. The detectives immediately found the relationship between the son and mother strange. There wasn't a single photograph of him in the house, no hint of a son, as if he didn't exist for Sonya. Overall, he seemed like the family outcast, especially compared to Sonya's favorite, Eric. John explained that although he and his mother sometimes couldn't find common ground and didn't communicate, the situation had improved recently, and he would never harm her. When asked who he believed could have committed the murder, he could only mention Sherry, Larry's sister. After all, she genuinely hated Sonya. As did Dennis. The FBI questioned both of them, but they had alibis. Moreover, no one was as devastated by Sonya's death as these two. They hoped Sonya would pay for her terrible actions by going to prison. So the detectives turned their attention back to John. The electronic emails signed with his name didn't work in his favor. Furthermore, he failed the polygraph test. Even his own relatives considered him the murderer. Allegedly, no one else had the motive, opportunity, and means to commit the crime, but he insisted on his innocence, and stood his ground. Therefore, the detectives didn't rush to arrest him. And they were rewarded with a clue from the Black Widow herself. A few days before Sonya's death, she contacted the police to report two strange incidents at her beauty salon. The first time, a young man appeared at her hairdressing salon, wanting a haircut. He called her from the parking lot, and Sonya saw him through the window. She became suspicious because he had a short, military-style haircut. It was clear he didn't need a haircut, so she told him that she only served regular clients, which he wasn't. It seemed like the incident was resolved, but 2 days later, the same guy returned to the salon and this time acted more aggressively. He opened fire on Sonya, causing her to panic and call the police. She informed the officers that she didn't know the shooter, but she remembered he had called her 2 days ago. The cautious woman recorded his number. It belonged to a certain Fernando Romero. Romero himself had disappeared, but the detectives only needed a warrant to access the history of his calls. They expected the phone to lead them to John Bordeaux, but no, his number wasn't listed. Instead, they found the number of someone they knew well. A person who had communicated with Fernando not once or twice, but frequently, especially in the hours before and after the murder. The number belonged to Sonya's beloved nephew, Eric de la Cruz. Further on, after a week, the news reached the FBI. Specialists were investigating the IP addresses, from which the supposed letters from John Bordeaux were sent. All of them led to Asia, Hong Kong, Korea. These addresses belonged to naval bases. The FBI employees knew that Eric and Romero were two sailors who served on an aircraft carrier. It was likely that they knew each other. Could these young individuals have planned the murder while being on an American military ship? The FBI investigated the location of the ship during the time the emails were sent. It was in ports in Hong Kong, Japan, and South Korea at the same time the letters were sent. However, sending letters is one thing, but why would Eric kill a woman who cared for him better than his own son? Sonya was killed late in the evening on Friday. And on Monday morning, even before the office opened, Eric was already waiting for her lawyer. He wanted to know how much money he would inherit from his beloved aunt. However, Sonya had another card hidden up her sleeve. Eric didn't receive a cent. All her money, homes, cars, absolutely all of Sonya's belongings were left to her son, John Bordeaux. But the young man had another harsh blow awaiting him. It turned out that all this time, while he believed he was the main suspect of the police, John Bordeaux was being misled. And when the investigators simply presented him with a photograph of Fernando Romero, Eric lost his ability to speak. Choking on surprise and stumbling over his words, he blurted out that he had conducted his own investigation, and Fernando had nothing to do with it. He must have realized that Fernando was the thread leading the investigation back to himself. Both young individuals were arrested and charged with the murder of Sonya Riskin. The police apologized to John for pressuring him. He was still frightened after what he had to endure, but he understood that the detectives were just doing their job. In February 2011, the trial began. Fernando and Eric were tried together. The prosecution faced a difficult task. The victim of the murder herself was suspected of orchestrating the killings of two husbands. The accused, the young sailors, could elicit sympathy in comparison. The prosecutor decided to be honest with the jury. He portrayed her as a cold-blooded killer deserving punishment, but now it was necessary to punish the defendants who not only killed a woman but also attempted to frame her son. It worked. The jury found the two guilty. They were sentenced to imprisonment ranging from 26 years to life. It was an astonishing family. They eliminated anyone in their path of financial gain. Sonya and her brothers killed Earl. Sonya and her brothers killed Larry. And Eric killed his beloved aunt. How many murders can there be in one family if it's not a Game of Thrones? The irony lies in the fact that Sonya killed two people who did nothing wrong and were always kind to her. Eric killed a person who had always been kind to him for the sake of money he never received. The Black Widow of Lamata truly reaped what she sowed. In 2019, Sherry went to the Philippines to personally try to find Larry's remains. She could only ascertain that the remains were passed from one relative to another under Eric's orders. In the end, her search led her to a house that had obviously been vacant for a long time. She couldn't fulfill her dream of returning with her brother's urn to their homeland. On April 14, 2023, two friends, 32-year-old Siraporn Kanwong and 36-year-old Sararat Rangsaiwathaporn, commonly known as M, arrived at the Meklong riverbank in Ratchaburi, Thailand, to release fish into the river. This act of kindness, a virtuous deed, essentially constituted a traditional Buddhist ceremony. A surveillance camera captured Siraporn as she walked along the riverside pier, carrying the fish. She appeared lively and perfectly healthy. However, just moments later, Siraporn collapsed and passed away. Bystanders attempted to help her, but it was already too late. The sudden loss of her daughter during a routine outing with a friend shocked Siraporn's mother. She shared her suspicions with the police because her daughter had recently become friends with M. Furthermore, she was troubled by the disappearance of her daughter's belongings, an expensive handbag, around 40,000 baht in cash, a little over $1,000, and 2 mobile phones. The police initiated an investigation and attempted to gather details from M about the incident. Surprisingly, M claimed that she wasn't with her friend during the river incident. However, surveillance footage painted a different picture. When bystanders tried to save Siraporn's life, her friend fled in the opposite direction. Only after irrefutable evidence was presented, did M admit that she was at the river during the Buddhist ceremony. Forensic experts examined Siraporn's blood and stomach contents, confirming investigators and the deceased's family's suspicions by detecting traces of cyanide in her kidneys. M was arrested on April 25, and during a search of her house, a bottle of cyanide was found. When news of Siraporn's suspicious death reached the media, several other families contacted the police, suddenly realizing that their loved ones had also died after last being seen in M's company. M was a graduate of Nakhon Pathom Rajabat University, located slightly west of Bangkok. During her time there, she didn't stand out, and her professors cannot recall anything unusual about her appearance or behavior. She obtained her diploma in 2009 and became a specialist in the field of public relations. From 2012 to 2022, over the course of 10 years, she worked as a representative for at least 3 leading insurance agencies in the Thai market. Investigators were relieved to find out that there were no insurance claims made for any of the 12 policies M had sold. M was married to a police officer named Witun Rangsaiwathaporn, with whom she lived until 2022. During this time, Witun rose to the rank of a lieutenant colonel, and the couple had 2 children. They lived in an apartment provided by the police force, where their neighbors were fellow police officers. Neighbors remember M as reserved and only interacting with well-off police families. In 2022, the couple separated, fairly amicably, as they continued to live together for some time afterward. However, by the end of 2022, M started seeing a 35-year-old man named Sutizak Poonkwon. The two were expecting a child, as M was 4 months pregnant. Unfortunately, on March 12, 2023, her boyfriend unexpectedly passed away, leading the police to now believe that he too fell victim to poisoning. After having dinner, Sutizak suddenly lost consciousness at a gas station. He was taken to the hospital, discharged, but unfortunately passed away the next day. Later, it became known to investigators that M had called her ex-husband, who came to her from Bangkok to Udon Thani. The former spouses got into Sutizak's car and without much hesitation, they went to apply for a loan, using the car as collateral. After that, they attempted to visit people to whom Sutizak had lent money, and tried to collect all these debts. In reality, M wanted to gain much more after her boyfriend's death. A representative from the insurance company contacted the police and shared that M had wanted to insure the man's life for 7 million baht or $200,000, but the regular insurance premium would have been 1,000 baht or $28, and she decided against pursuing this idea. With each new piece of information about M, investigators grew more horrified. 15 friends, aged 33 to 45, who had previously never complained about their health, suddenly fell ill after spending time with M. 14 of them passed away shortly after being in her company. This group even included 2 police officers. Police Major Nipa Sanjan passed away on April 1, 2023, due to respiratory and cardiac failure. She collapsed immediately after going with M to pray at Prapatam Cherdi in Nakhon Pathom. The police shared surveillance footage that captured the poisoning incident, and watching it is an emotional experience. Nipa was sitting on a bench when she suddenly became unwell. She curled up, hit her head, fell to the ground and lay motionless. What was her friend M doing at that moment? She was talking on the phone, with her hand resting on her side. At some point, she walked away from Nipa, completely ignoring her. She didn't even make an attempt to pretend to help. But was it worth expecting any semblance of care from her, considering she had already claimed 12 victims? Police Captain Kunda Torai didn't fare well after befriending M either. Kunda had just borrowed money from her friend before she was found lifeless in her car on August 10, 2022. There were no signs of trauma on her body. The car's dashcam, smartwatch, iPad, and mobile phone had all disappeared. The earliest murder linked to M dates back to 2015, involving the death of Montatip Kauin, known to everyone as Sai. M and Sai had been friends since childhood. While Sai wasn't exactly wealthy, she often lent various amounts of money to M. After marrying a foreigner, Sai moved to another country. However, in 2015, she returned to Thailand, and M picked her up from the airport in her car upon her arrival. Soon after, Sai passed away due to acute heart failure. Sai's mother remembers that M quickly intervened at the time, supposedly to handle her financial matters as per Sai's husband's request. Sai's family was shocked by her sudden death but believed it was fate. Yet, when news of M's accusations surfaced, they contacted the police, suspecting a connection, especially considering M had abruptly cut off all communication with Sai's family. As far as investigators know, after this incident, M refrained from committing crimes until 2020. However, from 2020 to 2023, 13 of her friends died. The symptoms they experienced were associated with cyanide poisoning. Some of them passed away after lending money to the suspect, while others had valuable items go missing. Kantima Paysard, who lent a substantial sum of money to M, believes that she could have been the 15th victim of the serial poisoner known as M Cyanide, as dubbed by journalists. Kantima had recently become friends with M. They went together to a large shopping center, but about a week before this, Kantima lent M 250,000 baht, approximately $7,000. While shopping, Kantima complained of a sore throat and feeling under the weather. M then gave her a cough medicine, likely of herbal origin. Kantima took the medicine, got into her car, and started driving home when she suddenly felt a heaviness in her chest. She attempted to call M, but M ignored her call. Fortunately, Kantima managed to reach the emergency medical hotline. By the time help arrived, she had stopped breathing, but medics were able to nearly bring her back to life. M never communicated with her again and didn't return the money. Now, of course, Kantima is certain that she could have become one of M's victims if help hadn't arrived in time. She reported her story to the police. M cyanide's motive confirms the conclusions of a criminological study that suggests the motive of female serial killers is often driven by the desire for enrichment or gain from people close to them. In contrast, for male serial killers, the motive is usually tied to satisfying their intimate needs and preying on victims. M Cyanide was addicted to gambling and had a desperate need to continue funding her addiction. She regularly visited gambling websites, and the police reported that somehow she lost nearly 1 million baht in a single day, which is approximately $28,000. Overall, the woman spent around 78 million baht on her addiction, over $2 million, which she obtained from her victims. Some of the money went toward paying off debts and obligations that M had accumulated due to her addiction, but not all of them were settled, and she continued to gamble with the rest. Law enforcement officers tried to identify the recipients of these funds and determine if any of these people were involved in the murders. While it's evident they weren't involved in the murders, the police are dismayed by the fact that online gambling websites continue to flourish in Thailand, generating significant profits for organized crime in the country and causing immense suffering for those who fall into their traps. The natural question arises: how did M convince her well-off acquaintances to give her money? After all, some of them had known her only recently, and it's unlikely that they would trust a new acquaintance so much. In reality, some people had known her since childhood, while others trusted her as a police officer's wife. Many of the victims were involved in financial schemes resembling pyramid schemes that M was part of. She would enter the lives of these affluent individuals, gaining their trust before various means of obtaining their money, including pyramid schemes, lottery fraud, shady investments, or simply borrowing money. Often, she would ask for small sums, and perhaps her well-off friends felt uncomfortable refusing her. Furthermore, in several cases, she managed to gain financial benefits even after poisoning her victims. For example, she assured the relatives of the deceased that she would handle all their affairs, gaining control. When victims inquired about getting their money back, she would invite them to lunch or on a trip and then introduce cyanide. Why didn't anyone notice that over a dozen acquaintances of M had died under suspicious circumstances? Because the poisoner operated in different provinces of the country, and until 2023, none of these cases were investigated. It's also important to note that the poisoner wasn't always in immediate proximity to the victims. For instance, Nimnakit, the wife of a doctor, passed away after ingesting a tablet sent to her by the poisoner via mail. The woman's husband believed his wife died due to constant fatigue and stress after giving birth to their little daughter. The poisoner had significant influence over Nim and dared to tell the young mother that she had gained weight during her pregnancy. She sent her a weight loss tablet. On November 23, just a month after giving birth, she sent another tablet, but it was dirty, and Nim couldn't take it. On the 25th of the same month, after taking the second tablet, Nim passed away. At that time, her husband wasn't at home, and her two children were left alone with their deceased mother until a neighbor came at the husband's request. Even though the woman's husband was a medical professional, he didn't suspect M and believe his wife had died of a heart condition they weren't aware of. A renowned forensic expert laments that Thailand lacks a coroner's office, which would be responsible for investigating sudden and suspicious deaths. In his opinion, if such a position existed, similar to those in the UK, Australia, and the US, M's crimes could have been uncovered sooner, and many lives could have been saved. M. Cyanide did not admit her guilt in the crimes, despite the efforts of the police. The lead investigator on the case explained that they only managed to get a partial admission from her regarding her involvement in the death of the latest victim, Siraporn. She made a vague statement suggesting that cyanide had been mixed with illicit substances, which the victim ingested. However, the investigator doesn't believe this story. The reason is quite simple: who would mix cyanide with prohibited substances, especially considering that cyanide is an extremely dangerous poison, and any dosage of it is associated with an immediate risk of death. Due to M's lack of confession, investigators were eager to identify the exact source of the cyanide and understand how she managed to easily access it over such a long period from 2015 to 2023. The cyanide used by the poisoner was the Spanish brand Pan-Riac, which is imported to Thailand by one of the 15 Thai companies. The lead investigator believed that someone helped M purchase the poison. It was revealed that her sister owns a pharmacy, but investigators were particularly interested in individuals who bought the substance with the same batch number as the one found in M's house. Among the 100 buyers, Thai actress Ice was identified. Possession of cyanide without permission is illegal in Thailand, and all buyers were summoned for questioning. Ice admitted to purchasing cyanide online on April 25 for 3,000 baht. She claimed she intended to use it against snakes and monitor lizards that posed a threat to her dogs, and even provided a video as evidence. Ice's mother confirmed that the sealed bottle was still at their home and they would bring it to the police station for questioning. The police didn't press charges against Ice. Nevertheless, social media users criticized her, insinuating that she might become the next serial killer and referencing her manager's death 3 years ago, trying to link it to cyanide. This is likely more indicative of the current state of social media rather than any real suspicions about her. As for where M obtained the poison, the police haven't yet disclosed whether they've managed to uncover any information on that matter. After 3 months, the investigation into the horrific cases of cyanide poisonings came to an end. The chief investigator stated that the police had interviewed over 900 witnesses and examined 26,500 documents. He noted that this is a historic case for Thailand, where the suspect planned serial killings over an 8-year period, poisoning victims with cyanide. The symptoms of cyanide poisoning, which medical professionals often mistake for natural health issues, such as stroke or heart attack, prevented doubts from arising in the minds of the victims' relatives. Her main goal was to obtain funds from the victims and eliminate the debts that burdened her. M. Cyanide has been charged with approximately 80 counts, an unprecedented number in Thailand's history. In addition to attempted murder and intentional homicide of 14 individuals, she is accused of food and drug adulteration, theft, and document forgery. Her former lawyer, Thanicha Ichwanawat, and her ex-husband have been charged with aiding and abetting. Her ex-husband was dismissed from his job and arrested after his connection to forged documents and possession of stolen property, particularly victims' jewelry, was discovered. Despite this, he was released on bail and placed under electronic monitoring due to the lack of direct evidence linking him to the murders. Additionally, some leniency was shown towards him after expressing a willingness to meet his ex-wife in prison and convince her to confess to the poisonings. If she confesses to the crimes, she might expect some leniency from the court, otherwise, she could face the death penalty. When news of the charges against M emerged in April 2023, some families of the victims demanded the death penalty for her. However, some legal experts suggested that her life would likely be spared even if she is found guilty. This is due to the Criminal Procedure Code, which was amended in 2007, preventing the execution of a pregnant defendant. Although the death penalty can be postponed for 3 years, the punishment will automatically be commuted to life imprisonment if her child is alive after 3 years. Unfortunately, it later became known that M had lost her child, making her ineligible for this provision of the law. The police emphasized that the maximum punishment she faces is the death penalty. Currently, she is held in a women's prison in Bangkok and reportedly enjoys popularity among the inmates. The government has announced impending changes to the regulations for purchasing cyanide in Thailand. Importers will be required to provide detailed information about all buyers, whether individuals, businesses, or factories. Providing the reason for the purchase will be mandatory. If importers fail to provide this information to the police every 3 months, their licenses will be revoked. If M is found guilty of the numerous poisonings, her name will be added to the list of serial killers in Thailand over the past 100 years. Up until this point, the list had only included male names. The roster of infamous murderers who struck fear into the country's residents includes Boonpeng Heap Lek, also known as Iron Chest Boonpeng, publicly beheaded in 1919 for not only taking victims' lives but also placing bodies in boxes and throwing them into a canal. He killed between 2 and 7 people. Among recent criminals, Somkid Pumpwang, known as Kid the Ripper, stands out. He was sentenced to life imprisonment for the murder of 5 masseuses in 2005. Chamorne Saint-Ouen allegedly poisoned at least 8 truck drivers in 2011 to 2012 but died before being convicted. The list also features COIT, a convicted child killer who was executed in 1959, and the notorious adventurer Charles Sobrage, who managed to escape police custody in the 1970s after murdering 12 people. He earned nicknames like the Bikini Killer due to the attire of his victims and the Serpent for his skilled deception and ability to evade justice. He's the only one whose victim count compares to that of the one woman, who is likely to join this list, CIANIDE.
Nashville, Tennessee, April 11, 2005. It was just past 4 p.m. when someone knocked on Regine Beverly's door. When Regine opened the door, her neighbor Martha Freeman rushed in without even looking her in the eyes and immediately blurted out that her husband Jeffrey had been killed. Regine hurriedly dialed 911 and reported that an armed man had attacked her neighbors. It took the police only a few minutes to surround the Freeman's house. However, the SWAT team that stormed in found no signs of violence, no unknown assailant or Jeffrey until they entered the master bathroom. The lifeless body of a man protruded from a sleeping bag with a plastic bag over his head and his entire body covered in bruises. Jeffrey Freeman had been bound, beaten, and then strangled. But how did his killer manage to disappear so quickly, and why did he allow Martha to escape? Martha Cockrell, 30 years old, and Jeffrey Freeman, 34 years old, met in 1995. Martha worked at a Nashville newspaper, was a very friendly woman, skilled at breaking the ice when meeting people, and she had no trouble winning Jeffrey over, who was one of her advertisers. At first glance, it was clear that Martha and Jeffrey were a perfect match. In March 1994, the couple had a very modest wedding ceremony, and just a few weeks later, they purchased a new home in one of America's finest neighborhoods, Brentwood, a southern suburb of Nashville. After some time, Martha took a risk and changed her career path. She left her job at the newspaper, obtained a private detective license, and founded her own company, Recifax. Employers and landlords turned to her to check the financial stability and credit history of potential employees or tenants. Initially, the entire company consisted of one employee, Martha, who worked day and night in the guest bedroom of her home. But soon, the company began to grow, moved into a business center, and had 2 employees, with Jeffrey joining in 2003. As the business expanded, Jeffrey took on more responsibilities, devoting himself entirely to work, which allowed Martha more free time. Soon, her daily routine underwent significant changes, but that wasn't the only thing that changed. Usually a happy and optimistic person, Martha stopped being herself. She would fluctuate between cheerful moods and periods of depression without understanding why. Fortunately, her doctor understood, and in 2004, she was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. Learning that there was a logical explanation for her sudden mood swings, Martha even felt somewhat relieved. She followed her doctor's treatment recommendations and decided to spend less time working and more with her family, especially her elderly mother who had diabetes. However, when her mother passed away a year later, it deeply affected Martha. She started taking more medication, distanced herself from friends, and spent a lot of time in her late mother's room. Jeffrey was very concerned about his wife's health and supported her in every way possible. He took on all the household chores and worked tirelessly, often even on weekends. Despite his busy schedule, he dedicated every free moment to his wife, trying to help her relax and not sink into depression. The two of them traveled, attended concerts and music festivals. This was the case on July 4, 2004, when the entire country celebrated Independence Day. The spouses arrived in Nashville with plans to have a night out, watch the fireworks, and stay at a hotel. However, Jeffrey, tired after a long week at the office, could barely stay awake until nightfall. He admitted to his wife that he just wanted to go home. Martha, who had forgotten about her depression for the first time in months, didn't want the evening to end. The couple had an argument and Jeffrey went home, leaving Martha to spend the night in the city. But the night without her husband and the newfound independence marked a turning point in their marriage. Just a month later, Martha left their home and moved into a motel. She wanted some time alone to find herself. While still being a devoted husband, Jeffrey supported his wife's decision. He took care of her needs and paid for her motel room. However, in reality, Martha needed more than just personal space. This is because at the motel, she was living not alone but with an undocumented immigrant from Mexico, whom she called Christian. The man didn't speak English, and Martha didn't know Spanish. But that didn't matter because Martha was interested in more than just conversation with the man. 6 months later, Jeffrey noticed that he was paying for 2 people's expenses, and in January 2005, he went to see his wife at the motel. However, he didn't come looking for a fight. On the contrary, he came to persuade Martha to return home. Martha realized that she had been behaving poorly towards her husband and agreed to give their marriage another chance. Fortunately, Christian also took the situation quite calmly. He didn't create any scenes that Martha had feared. Martha returned home, and one thing that stood out from the ideal picture was that the spouses slept in separate rooms on different floors. Nevertheless, to the neighbors, it seemed like the family's life had returned to its usual course. Redfin Beverly's neighbor, Martha Freeman, was shocked when, on April 11th, just 3 months after the family reunited, Martha came running to her house, screaming that her husband had been killed. Redfin asked if she had called the police, and when Martha replied no, Redfin dialed 911 herself. Due to Martha's confusing account, she reported that an armed intruder with a shotgun was still inside the neighbor's house. However, when the SWAT team entered, there were no signs of an intruder. Jeffrey was found on the 2nd floor. He had indeed been killed, but not by a gunshot. He had been bound, beaten, strangled, and then inexplicably unbound. He was soaked and lay in a sleeping bag right in the middle of the bathroom. Surprisingly, the house was impeccably clean, and if it weren't for the body, there was nothing to suggest a murder. However, what was even more astonishing was that the body was cold, indicating that the crime had occurred several hours earlier. The clean house and Jeffrey's body didn't fit with the sudden attack on the family, so investigators turned to Martha Freeman for explanations. Unlike Jeffrey, she had no bruises on her. Surprisingly, she was composed and provided an accurate description of the assailant. She stated that nobody had broken into the house and she knew who the killer was. The only thing she didn't know was his whereabouts. However, if Martha didn't know, her neighbors did. They had seen a man running down the road who had jumped into a partially constructed house. Officers had no trouble arresting the man hiding there. He didn't speak English, but he matched Martha's description. When they brought him to the police car where a woman was sitting, she immediately identified him. Christian, whose real name was Rachel Rocha Perez, was charged with murder. He refused to cooperate with the police. Martha, on the other hand, was quite talkative. She revealed that she had known Perez since July and had been living with him in a motel for several months. However, she confessed that her decision to return to her husband did not mark the end of her affair. About a month ago, her lover secretly entered the family's house and had been hiding in the closet. When Jeffrey was not at home, Perez could move around the house. But in the presence of Martha's husband, he tried to remain as quiet as possible. It's remarkable that the lovers managed to keep Perez's presence in the house a secret for an entire month. However, the previous night, Christian accidentally revealed his presence to Jeffrey. When Jeffrey entered Martha's room, he heard snoring coming from her closet. After opening the door, he found Christian inside. Jeffrey informed the lovers that he would take the dog for a walk, and that when he returned, Perez should no longer be in the house. Otherwise, he would call the police. According to Martha, this infuriated her lover, and upon Jeffrey's return, Perez dragged him into the bathroom and locked the door. She heard sounds of a struggle and splashing water, after which it became eerily quiet. Her husband had been killed. Martha spent most of the day in a state of shock and horror while Perez cleaned up the crime scene. She was afraid to even think about what he might do to her after killing her husband. The investigators gathered evidence at the crime scene that corroborated Martha's account of her lover hiding in the closet. They found a mattress, a blanket, magazines in Spanish, men's clothing, as well as a bag containing provocative lingerie, explicit photos of Martha, and adult toys. Additionally, the police discovered the shotgun and signs that someone had cleaned up the house, including trash bags, gloves, and a wet towel. On the first floor, in the living room, there was a beach towel spread out on the floor, which they initially believed had been used for cleaning. However, this towel would later prove to be a crucial piece of evidence. 5 days after the murder of Jeffrey Martin, Martha appeared in the courtroom for a preliminary hearing. She was the main witness against Perez. Martha described what was already known about Perez's attack on Jeffrey. However, her story became less convincing when she described her affair with a lover. Martha calmly recounted how she had met him on Independence Day while her tired husband went home. Christian was with 2 friends, and Martha invited all 3 to go to a hotel and have fun. At the hotel, she engaged in intimate relations with all 3 strangers. Martha's confession shocked everyone in the courtroom, including the judge. But everyone was even more shocked when Perez's lawyer began to press her, demanding an answer to why she waited nearly 18 hours to report the murder. Did Perez not get distracted for a minute during those 18 hours while her husband lay dead in the bathroom cleaning the house so she could dial 911? Martha had no answer to this question, but she didn't have to answer it because something extraordinary happened. The judge interrupted the trial, stating that he didn't understand why Martha was present in the courtroom as a witness and not as a defendant. He wasn't sure of her guilt, but advised her to think about getting a lawyer to protect her constitutional rights. The judge's words prompted the police to take a closer look at Martha's role in the case. First and foremost, they obtained the phone records of both Martha and Jeffrey, which led to a significant breakthrough. On the night of Jeffrey's death, someone called his mother at 11 p.m. This wasn't unusual because he always called his mother on Sunday evenings. However, it was Martha who made the call that night. She explained to her mother-in-law that Jeffrey wasn't feeling well, had taken medicine, and had gone to sleep, so he wouldn't be able to talk as usual. According to Jeffrey's mother, Martha sounded completely calm. However, forensic analysis didn't find any drugs in Jeffrey's system. The next morning, Martha picked up the phone again and called her workplace to inform them that her husband would be taking the day off. Once again, her voice sounded perfectly calm. What's more, while her husband lay dead in the bathroom, Martha left the house twice, once to walk the dog and once to go to the pharmacy. In other words, if she had wanted to, Martha could have reported the crime to the police. However, she didn't do so. Furthermore, it appeared that she had likely engaged in sexual activity with her lover on the living room floor after Jeffrey was killed. Forensic analysis of the beach towel spread on the living room floor revealed Perez's semen and Martha's DNA. Consequently, 4 months after Jeffrey's death, Martha was also charged with murder. The trial began on December 25, 2006. Martha and her lover were tried simultaneously. This was a tactic employed by the prosecutors to make the accused point fingers at each other. According to the prosecutors, the motive behind the crime was money. Due to their romantic involvement and Martha's mental state, she would never be able to keep the business in case of a divorce. Therefore, the accomplices killed Jeffrey, put him in a bag, and cleaned up the house. But they couldn't get rid of the body. Time was running out as a repairman was expected to arrive any minute. That's when Martha panicked and went with Plan B, fleeing to her neighbor's house. The prosecution had virtually no evidence implicating both accomplices in the crime. The jury could have acquitted both Martha and Perez. Additionally, the judge decided to exclude the shocking details of Martha's intimate life from the case. The jurors didn't hear them, but that was not necessary since the prosecutor's tactics worked perfectly. The defense lawyers constantly shifted blame onto the other side, which was exactly what the prosecutors needed. On September 28, 2006, the jury found both defendants guilty. They were automatically sentenced to life imprisonment. According to Tennessee law, they would have to serve 51 years before they could even be considered for parole. Martha filed an appeal, accusing her lawyer of poor performance. It turns out the prosecutors had offered her a deal, 20 years in exchange for her testimony against Perez. However, her lawyer advised against it. If she had agreed, she could have been released in just a few years. Her last appeal in June 2020 was denied. Now, Martha can only be eligible for parole in 2064 when she turns 100 years old.